Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams. This is my twice weekly show. We're running an hour early this morning as I had a lunch date, which has just been rather annoyingly cancelled. So I could have gone out at the normal time anyway. Anyhow, what have we got for you today? Well, it's fairly busy but short show. The storm warning for Isha is in force across all of the UK actually, and we'll have a quick look at that in the Weather for Bikers session. New pumpwatch scheme has been created by the government, and major fuel retailers are signing up for that. I'll explain what that's all about and what benefits it could possibly bring motorcyclists. The EU has extended the suspension of the tariffs which affected Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Excuse me. The final data from 2023, the MCIA's registration numbers, they show that sales actually flatlined last year, contracted little in fact. GPS data shows that London is actually the slowest city in the world, and a woman has come in for some hilarity on social media for her mirrors, but we'll have a quick look at those and see if they're such a daft idea. CFMoto, they are working on some active suspension that actually reacts before you hit a bump, which would be a world first for a motorcycle. And Bennetts BikeSocial has asked a question that I was discussing only very recently about whether Chinese bikes could actually dominate the market. And finally, in depth today, I've been talking about electric motorcycles, and over the last couple of weeks I've been wondering if there's actually a concerted industry pushback. And today we'll look at BMW's approach to electric bikes, where they seem to be hedging their bets a little bit. They do have some existing e-bike designs, but they're also calling for synthetic fuel for future bikes. So that'll be the in-depth item to finish the show. Don't forget, if you have a question, if you've got a comment on anything I have to say, do drop me a line. Always interested to know what people have to say. Kevin is here an hour early. Good morning to you, Kevin. Nice to see you. So, okay, on with the show then. Right, first thing to say, the weather. That's the thing I'm looking for. Now, as always, I try and get this set up in advance, and it never seems to work. I need a producer. Anybody fancy producing a show twice a week would be very handy. Actually, sometimes it does get really frustrating when I think I've set something up and it turns out that I haven't. Yeah, everything seems to have gone pear-shaped again this morning. I was in a little bit of a rush to get it all set up. So hopefully I have now got it sorted. So what I can do in just a second is actually get the picture up on screen that I plan to get up on screen. There it is. It's going up at last. Right, there we are. Weather forecast. Right, okay. So what have we got for you today? Well, Storm Isha has brewed up in the Atlantic, but nothing stops the daft headlines, of course, because on Friday, just at the same time the Met Office was creating their first weather warning, the Mirror predicted temperatures in the UK are set to rocket to 25 Celsius in just 5 days, along with a picture of people sitting in deck chairs with their shirts off. Not very likely. Today is a lot milder, but it is already a breezy morning here in London. Things are waving around out there, and overnight and into the Monday it will get very windy in the southeast. The Met Office's original amber warnings for winds for the whole of Scotland and the north of England, Wales and the southwest have actually been upgraded to an orange warning, and they're fairly rare. The amber warning is in force for the rest of the UK, and there are also flood alerts to contend with too. Now, the strongest winds will be arriving in the west and the southwest during the day. They will ramp up after dusk across the rest of the country, and they will clear the southeast during Monday morning. So gusts up to 80 miles per hour are expected around the coasts, and 40 to 50 miles per hour widely in central England. So disruption to travel is likely. I know that one road has been closed already in Snowdonia because it crosses a couple of high bridges. So riding a motorcycle probably isn't a great idea unless you get yourself back fairly quickly in the southeast today. Being out on the road altogether is probably best avoided. Winds will drop from the west through Monday. It will be rather cooler. Widespread showers, they will fall as snow over the higher hills, particularly in Scotland, and more rain will sweep across the country, heaviest from the north and the west. Now, once again, it will be very mild and up to 14 Celsius possibly on Wednesday, but it will stay windy, but it will become drier, brighter and cooler as we get towards midweek. So, right, okay, on with the news then. What else have I got to talk about? Well, the first thing to talk about is this interesting scheme, the pumpwatch. Now, you may be wondering what that's all about and whether it's a bit of a gimmick. I suspect it probably is in some ways, but 12 major retailers have signed up to it, including Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's and Asda. It's a price comparison scheme. Now, it's been introduced by the Competition Markets Authority, the CMA, after they reported last year that some retailers have been failing to pass on costs on savings costs on oil, which is charged wholesale to the supermarket. Those prices dropped, the pump prices didn't, and they say that the CMA say that drivers were charged up to 6 pence per litre more for fuel than the wholesale costs warranted, and that cost drivers £900 million in 2022. Now, it is the forerunner to a compulsory scheme which would legally require fuel retailers to update prices on their pumps on an app within 30 minutes of any price change on the site. That data then becomes available to drivers and motorcyclists, obviously, so you can see where you can get your cheapest fuel in the area. Not much of a issue where when you're putting 3 gallons of petrol in a tank, sort of 13.5 litres or so, it doesn't really make a vast amount of difference. But when you are filling a tank which is costing you 70 or 80 pounds to fill, 6p off is actually quite a lot of money. Now, according to government, the scheme could help drivers save 3p per litre per fuel, but I think that's probably a bit of an underestimate. But what does concern me, of course, is two things. First of all, that there is still a big split between the cheapest fuel and the most expensive fuel, and it doesn't really seem to be based on difficulty of getting the fuel to the location either. I noticed, I noted a few weeks ago that the most expensive petrol in the UK was actually in London and the outer Scottish Isles. Now, why is, if you can argue that you've got to get the fuel to those outer Scottish islands, that's a tricky task involving ferries, but it's not the issue for London. We have a huge oil refinery, of course, just up the Thames at Oil of Grain, where there's huge oil tanks. And just this weekend, the cars have been filled up in Shrewsbury, and the fuel was over 10p a litre cheaper there than it would have been at our local supermarket. So we could do with some price levelling. My second worry is that if you tell drivers where they can get the cheapest fuel, you're also telling all the petrol stations what their competitors are charging. And so it could all backfire and everybody could just set the same price as everybody else. Anyway, comments on that. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about that. We have John that looked in. He says he's having a quiet day at home, so he's here for the show. Good to see you. Cold ride, he said, on Friday morning to get the head bearings changed on his Trident. Yes, it certainly was a bit on the chilly side. Took a long time for the frost to go here. Sue's looked in, and Sue said that she missed we were having it at 10 a.m. Yeah, I just explained about that. I was supposed to be going out for a lunch date, but it literally just as I came on air, it's been cancelled. And Nick says fuel just gone up 20 cents in Germany. 20 cents? Yes, okay. Of course, euro. I'm forgetting that you're you're in Germany. Right, okay. So Second story is also petrol oriented, because it's the question about whether EVs will kill off the petrol station. There have been some people saying that if everybody starts taking up EVs, then what will happen is there'll be no petrol stations. But William Bannister, who's the CEO of MFG, who are one of the UK's biggest independent filling station groups, they own more than 900 sites, and I think if I remember correctly, they're also in talks with Morrison's to take over their sites, but don't quote me on that. I know I mentioned that story a few days ago. Now, he was reported as saying by Autocar that by 2030, quote, the car market could be up at about 20% EVs, which means that there will still be a huge demand for fossil fuel. But what he does expect is that EVs will climb to around 60% of the market by 2035, with numbers continuing to rise. So what's happening? Well, MFG sites are adapting, and what they are doing is offering rapid charging beside fuel, so they're ready for electric vehicles to start dominating over petrol pumps, and presumably what they'll do is they will steadily replace pumps with electric charging points if, as expected, the switch happens. Now, what they say is the aim is to provide multiple well-maintained chargers with good uptime, typically over 98% working, which are safe and well lit. 700 sites can offer dual fuel straight away, but another 250 will require improved electrical supply. So basically, what they can do then is they can drop a charging hub in, and they say these cost around £1 million, and MFG are actually investing around 400 million on the infrastructure. Now, he also says that he thinks that it's unlikely that some independents will actually be able to afford the investment, and some small stations will close. But the fact is, small filling stations have been closing regularly since Tesco became the first supermarket selling fuel in 1979. Hard to believe it was that long ago. There were no less than 40,000 filling stations in that year. Today we have just around 8,400, and 100, get my numbers right today, 1,000 of those are small independents. Obviously need better glasses. So, we've got a couple of comments here from Kevin. He says he mainly runs on SOE5 as it has zero ethanol down south, so I won't be doing much chasing of pump prices. I wouldn't worry about it, frankly, Kevin. The E5 issue is largely a myth unless you run a classic older motorcycle or something that came with plastic tanks like Ducatis. I do have to run my 1980 Honda on the low alcohol fuel, but the rest of it, don't worry about it. Issue recharging locations, lack of shelter for bikers. Yes, that's something that MAG have flagged up, and it's something that you need to think about, really. I don't know if there are instances of bikes being stolen from charging points while people dash in to get a coffee and a sort of bite to eat while it's on the charger, but it is something that needs to be thought about. Okay, on to the next story, which is an international one. You may recall that back in 2018, the then US President Donald Trump introduced tariffs on some imports of aluminum and steel products into the United States. This was allegedly done to protect the US metal industry. In response, the European Union introduced what they called rebalancing tariffs on some US products, I believe. Jack Daniels was affected. I think peanut butter was as well. But it certainly included motorcycles, which in obviously Harley Davidson and Indian, and the tariff made them more expensive. Now, under the Joe Biden presidency, the US did suspend those tariffs back in 2022, and that suspension lasted until the end of last year. And the idea was to enable the EU and the US to work together on a long-term solution. Now, the US has brought in a series of quotas rather than the flat tariff, and these quotas are now based on historical trade volumes. So only EU steel and aluminium exports which exceed the quota are still subject to tariffs. There is response from the EU has been to suspend the rebalancing tariffs to carry that through until the end of March 2025, basically give more time for a full deal to be done. Now, Jane Stevenson, she's the Director of Global Government Affairs at Harley Davidson. Amazing to actually have a Global Government Affairs Director, isn't it? Anyway, she says, Harley Davidson is extremely pleased to see the EU extend the suspension of tariffs on our motorcycles. However, a permanent solution is still needed. Our business has suffered collateral damage from this controversy since 2018, which will continue to loom over us until 2025. God help them then if Trump gets back in. However, it's still not all good news. She says, we remain extremely concerned that the resolution to this dispute will not be found by the 31st of March 2025 due to elections in the EU and the US. She also stated, motorcycles have no place in this dispute over steel and aluminium. Here in the UK, last year's final registration data is out. Registration data, not strictly speaking sales, although motorcycles generally do get registered, of course, as soon as they are bought, but there are obviously cases where motorcycles are pre-registered for things like test bikes or to create enough volume sales from a retailer to benefit from a discount. So what do they tell us? Well, they're not awful, but they're not great either. So really it's hard to see just why Tony Campbell has been so optimistic. Now, he's the CEO of the Motorcycle Industry Association, the MCIA, and he says, quote, 2024 will be an exciting year for the sector, which will build upon another solid performance in 2023. Well, total sales of 2023 were just over 113,500 machines, got my number right this time, and that was actually down 2.5% on 2022 numbers. And he continued, the scooter and motorcycle markets will become even more an even more important contributor to the transport ecosystem. Well, you know, is that right? You have a look at the bike sales. The commuter class A1 machines, they're the ones from 51 cc's to 125. They remain the biggest selling category, that's for sure, and they account for a 34% plus of the total registrations. But they were down 7% last year on 2022. And if you go down to the smallest scooters, 50 cc's and mopeds, basically, the sales in that category are absolutely crashed. Last year, just 3,772 were sold. That's down 11% on 2022. And that is way down on figures from 5 or 10 years ago. Now, these bikes make up the bulk of those commuter sales that he's talking about, the sort of the transport ecosystem. And in fact, it's the leisure biking section, which is the only one that's actually doing vaguely well at the moment. And even there, it's only in the 751 to 1000 cc category where sales are up by a quarter. And why is that? I can only imagine it's probably driven by the new twin cylinder motorcycles from Honda, Suzuki, etc. So is it really as you know, a rosy sales picture? I honestly don't think so. Right, okay, now I don't know where she sourced them, but I'm guessing there may be a truck somewhere missing its mirrors. This lady, seen riding her scooter in Malaysia, has clearly solved the problem that many of us complain about her seeing our elbows in the mirrors. She got a lot of fun poked at her on social media, but frankly, I'd quite like mirrors where I can see behind me fitted to motorcycles as a matter of course. Right, okay, so back to the news. Where is traffic slowest in the world? Well, if TomTom data collected from connected GPS-equipped vehicles around the world is to be believed, out of 387 cities in 55 countries located on 6 continents, the slowest moving city in the world is, step forward proudly and take a bow, London. Average travel time during the rush hour for a 10-kilometre drive, that's 6.2 miles in our capital, is no less than 37 minutes and 20 seconds. That's actually up a minute on last year. And it means that the average driver moves at a fairly stately 14 kilometres per hour, or about 8.7 miles per hour. I was fairly surprised though that Dublin wasn't too far behind, 16 kilometres per hour, just under 10 miles per hour. And behind the Irish came Toronto, Milan and Lima. Now, the cities I really expected to be on the list, New York is only in 20th place on the list, and you can get up to an astonishing 20 kph there, 12.5 miles per hour. And Los Angeles, which I really thought would be way up the list, is down in 233rd place. The journey takes just 15 minutes, so it's almost twice as quick as it is in London. But if you spread the net to cover an entire metro area rather than the city centres, the picture changes, and now the wooden spoon goes to Manila in the Philippines, where a 10-kilometre drive over the wider sort of urban area takes 25 minutes 30 seconds, which is 19 kilometres per hour or 11.8 miles per hour. And then come Lima, Bengaluru, Sapporo, I thought there's winter sports there, not driving cars, and Bogota. Right. Right, so why are we slow? Kevin says, well done again to the London Mayor. Well, I think that's probably a reasonably unfair. I suspect that there are some of the moves to promote green transport which have impeded drivers. It's more to do with the infrastructure, really, and the fact that people insist on creating jobs where people have to drive. If you didn't have to drive to your job, you wouldn't have traffic congestion. So I think it's businesses, it's city planners, rather than the mayor, who basically has to cope with a problem which has been several hundred years in the making. 50C sales, are they being cannibalised by the sales of electric bikes? About as fast, no CPT, no helmet, no tax, no insurance required. Well, the legal ones, of course, can travel at 15.5 miles per hour. There are plenty of illegal ones around, which you don't need to pedal either. That's the other point, of course. The pedelec legal bikes, you do have to put some leg effort into it, which may not suit people who've been jumping off a moped where their legs are idle. But I guess some could have gone that way. Perhaps so they've also lost out to electric e-scooter rental schemes. You know, I don't know. The other possibility, of course, is that people have switched to electric scooters, and certainly while sales of those have been fluctuating, they were down quite a lot last year overall. There are plenty of electric scooters, mopeds in town, used by one of the delivery services. I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head. So there are lots of interesting questions there. It's certainly a complex picture which we need to think about, and that it kind of leads me neatly to an article that you might want to read on the Bennetts BikeSocial site. Now, it was written by Ben Purvis, who I don't always agree with. I think sometimes he does write some dubiously balanced articles, but in this particular case, his post on Friday up on the social site says many of the same things I've been saying for a couple of years now. I'm just putting the link up to it now so you can go and look at it. Now, just the other day, I said that the Japanese and European manufacturers need to watch their backs, because if they don't respond to the pace of advance of Chinese-made bikes, they could find themselves in the same unfortunate situation that the UK bike industry found itself in back in the 1960s, as the incoming Japanese bikes whipped the carpet out from underneath them, because basically they were reliable, they were higher performance, and they were cheaper. Now, whether it's coincidence that he wrote about this or because he read my article, I don't know, but Ben says much the same. Your granddad probably never believed a Japanese bike could rival the stuff made in England, and by ignoring the advances we're seeing in China, we could be guilty of the same blinkered view. Now, as for the idea that China can't manufacture quality products, he says that viewpoint has been, quote, debunked again and again. Check where your iPhone was made, or your Tesla for that matter. The designs might be from the West, but much of the production is Chinese. He could also, of course, have mentioned KTM, who obviously have seen the benefits of shifting not just production, but also R&D to China. He also mentions the Cove Rally 450 machine. Now, I happen to know a few people who have bought that machine for green laning, and they've given it a serious thumbs up. Many of them actually rate it higher than the equivalent Honda, and it's quite a bit cheaper too. So go and read that story. I think you'll discover, I'll say his thinking there matches mine on this one. Kevin comes back to me on the congestion in London, and he says he takes it the point recommuting, but bus lane restrictions and low traffic networks are a factor. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think some of these schemes have been very badly thought out. But don't forget, most of these are are local council initiatives and nothing to do with Sadiq Khan. Stop blaming the mayor for things that he's not doing. If you read the right-wing political press, and I do apologise for getting into politics here, they demonise him, and they demonise him for things which are generally nothing to do with him, but are down to local councils, which include low traffic networks and most of the cycle lanes. The one running along Euston Road, I will bitch about heartily because it's almost unoccupied and restricts the traffic to a terrible extent as you run past St Pancras Station. But most of the rest are not down to Mr. Khan. Right, okay, fairly short show this morning, so it's already time for the in-depth piece, which hopefully I have a banner picture for that. No, I don't. Where's it gone? Oh no. It's all gone horribly wrong. As I said, I've got all the photos out of order. No, I can't find it. All right, okay. I thought I'd done this so carefully too. Right, so where are we? Get rid of the woman with her mega mirrors. Oh, there it is. I must have skipped past it by accident. Right, so deep dive then, this morning's feature. Now I'm continuing on the topic of just where motorcycle manufacturers see the future of motorcycles. And right on cue, BMW have been talking about their plans. Now, let's just start with a reminder of what BMW have been up to in the past. Now, this bike here is not the one that I wanted to show you. No, I've lost it again. Where the hell is it? No, I can't find it. All right, never mind. We'll come back to the pictures in just a moment. I do have a picture of it somewhere, but I can't find it. The motorcycle that I wanted to show you a picture of was the C Evolution. Now, BMW have been dabbling with electric motorcycles for quite some time, probably longer than most people actually realise. It's probably slipped minds that they actually launched the C Evolution scooter over a decade ago. And it might have been a sort of eco-friendly, reasonably powerful scooter. It was 35 kilowatt actually, quite powerful for the time, 45 horsepower, and it was cheap to run obviously. But the initial outlay was no joke a decade ago at £13,500. It was also heavy, 275 kilograms. You can work out what that is in pounds for yourself, but it is way over 500 pounds. Range was in the short commute bracket too, no more than 60 miles. Now it did get a mid-life upgrade when the range got extended to a more usable 90 miles, and an extra 8 kilowatts of power under the bonnet when it got fitted with the same battery as is in the i3 car. Now that crossover is quite interesting, I think. The bike that I was trying to show you a moment ago, this one here, That's the CE04. Now, this came in 2022, and it replaced the outgoing C Evolution, which was removed from the sales charts in 2020. Now this actually shipped with slightly lower price tag than the original electric bike, 11,700. So I would imagine that some of the early adopters were a little bit unhappy about that. They also managed to cut more than 40 kilograms off the weight. That's almost 100 pounds. So quite a reduction in weight. Still a bit heavy, but much closer to some of the big super scooters. But it did lose some power. It was down to 42 horsepower, and the range was sort of again halfway between the two previous iterations. It was about 80 miles. And then last year, you'll recall the BMW announced the CE02. That is a learner legal 11 kilowatt lightweight scooter, just 132 kilograms for that, so ballpark with petrol engines, but only 50 mile range, obviously 65-70 mile per hour top speed, and a £7,500 price tag, so sort of double what you could pay for a basic scooter, really. Now, beyond that, more speculatively, there's been talk of a return for the BMW C1. Now, if you remember your BMWs, that's the scooter with the roof. And it's known too that BMW have been looking to use the CE04's drivetrain in a more compact electric motorcycle with the scooter components reoriented to fit in the shorter but taller space under the tank, if you forgive me for that term, of a traditional motorcycle design. There's been some talk of it actually being fitted to a 310 GS, but my guess is that they'll probably have to redesign the entire thing. But the implication is that might actually imply construction in India, though that is a guess on my part. Now, rather less road ready is the Vision DC Roadster. Sorry about the horrible picture. The BMW one was even more difficult to see, so I have enhanced it, but it is a bit sort of, it's not a particularly good picture, is it? It's obviously CGI'd. That's probably why they hid it in deep shadow. Anyway, this sort of reimagines the Boxer engine as an EV. For some reason built onto a machine which has what looks like an almost unrideable position. Now, BMW have in the past acknowledged that battery power is suited to shorter urban journeys and commuting. And 2 years ago, they were promising that all new urban mobility models from BMW would be electric by 2025. So that is now less than 1 year away. And that they also said that many other models would switch to battery power by 2030. Now, I think that announcement was actually made at the January 2022 Consumer Electronics Show, which is over on the west coast of the US, at the same time as they launched the CE04. But 2 years, it's a long time in marketing. So where are BMW now? Well, interestingly, they declared last week that their car sales indicated that they had now passed the tipping point in the shift from ICE motors to EVs. And they now said that electric models are making out 15% of their total sales, and sales are climbing. So, what about motorcycles? Well, coincidentally, at much the same time, just last week, the German bike magazine Motorrad talked to the head of BMW Motorrad, the motorcycle section, Markus Schramm. And I asked a pretty pointed question amongst all the other questions about BMW Boxer twins and things. 18 months ago, you announced the upcoming BMW electric motorcycle for 2025. That's now been pushed back to 2026. Why is that? And here is the answer. Now, listen carefully. Among other things, it is due to the market. Basically, it can be said that the electric market for two-wheelers is 10 years behind that of cars. Last year, we had 2.5% of our sales electric. This year, it will be 5%. These are the values that BMW Auto had 10 years ago. Now, so far, nothing unexpected there, although I would note that even if it's a very low percentage, it is doubled. His next comment did rock me backwards. But that also means there's no point in offering a motorcycle at a time when the clientele is not yet ready to accept it. For such reasons, we sometimes prefer to postpone models for a year. Now let's think that through for a moment. If you don't offer an electric motorcycle, how do you know that buyers are not yet ready to accept it? Which is the chicken, which is the egg? Unfortunately, the interviewer didn't follow up by asking that question because the answer would have been very interesting indeed. But what he did ask was this. If you could ask the EU for one thing, what would it be? The answer, I think, is revealing. It will be quite clearly, said Herr Schramm, to push the topic of e-fuels. That is important for a number of reasons. We currently have 40 million motorized two-wheelers in Europe with an average lifespan of 20 years. But while we are now waiting for them all to become electric, we are blowing away 250 million tons of CO2. This could be prevented by the use of e-fuels. And although motorized two-wheelers only account for 0.3% of CO2 emissions in Europe, that would be a huge step. In the case of passenger cars, it would be even greater. The introduction of e-fuels would be possible immediately. It even brings performance advantages, as a test by Motorrad magazine has confirmed. That would be my wish, the only one, to promote e-fuels as soon as possible. Well, let's just think that through. Let's start with the performance advantage first of all. My belief is, and I will do more research on this, is that these claims are questionable. There's a certain calorific value in fuel, and it doesn't really matter whether you make that synthetically or whether you refine it from petroleum or whether you make it from biomass. If it's the same chemical formula, it has to have the same calorific value. You can't do anything else with it. You can play around with the synthesis, you can change the chemical formula, but then it's not quite the same thing. And the second question there, the introduction of e-fuels would be possible immediately. Is there any truth in that statement at all? Well, no, none whatsoever, because if you were going to synthesize e-fuels, you would have to have some means of powering that production. You can't create it out of nothing. And if you are going to make synthetic fuels from clean green sources rather than doing what many people are doing at the moment, which is making synthetic fuel from petroleum, which basically only introduces an extra step in the refining, the answer is you have to have electricity. And right now, we simply don't have enough. The US regularly suffers power brownouts during the winter and also during the summer as well, when everybody's got the aircon on. So we need more electricity, and that's not going to come without some very serious investment in generating capacity. It doesn't matter where we get that from, whether it's nuclear, whether it's solar, whether it's wind. And it doesn't matter either whether it's local to the synthetic fuel plant, as the Japanese seem to be planning, or whether the electricity is generated somewhere where there is an endless supply of alternative energy, such as sun in Chile, where they have got a synthetic fuel plant, a very, very small one. If the fuel then is created at the plant, there are two disadvantages. First of all, you put the political power for that production in the hands of whoever's making it. And secondly, you also introduce the cost of shipping it to consumers in tankers, just like petroleum. By creating energy and then using it to charge electric vehicles, you're removing an entire step from the chain. And that basically makes it cheaper and more energy efficient. And of course, you can produce electricity over a wide spread of area with a grid. I mean, our electric grid, people often forget, is connected to Europe. So if the wind's not blowing in Scotland and creating energy up there, if the sun's not shining in the south of England and creating energy there, it may well be creating it abroad. So Herr Schramm, he's right that PTWs are not a major contributor to CO2 emissions, but why go to all the trouble of creating more emissions by creating synthetic fuel? Because it's not going to be an emission-free process. And it's not as if petrol is going to vanish from the market overnight either when that ICE ban comes in. Now, as many people have acknowledged, ICE engines will be around for many years after. The more I listen to these industry statements, the more I think this is about costs and profits. They know how to build IC engines. They've got 100 years of experience of doing it. They've invested a huge amount of money in the existing technology, in the existing plants, and I think they just want to keep building them because it will be cheaper and they will make more money. There's one other factor that is worth consideration, and that's that there are alternative battery technologies under investigation, and BMW are actually amongst the brands working hard on significantly improving energy density and charging rates for future batteries. This was something that actually popped up in the comments. Somebody reminded me about capacitor-based batteries last week. So maybe those technologies are closer than we think, and this synthetic fuel thing is a bit of a smokescreen to deflect expectations that these alternative battery technologies are closer than we think. And just maybe manufacturers don't want to get trapped into building bikes which are sort of previous generation of battery. As always, more than happy to hear comments about that. Kevin just says that he concedes partially on the Sadiq Khan issue. C1, Nick says R. Actually, somebody I know had one of those and loved it. So, e-fuel solar plants in the Sahara, yes, they are, but look at the production levels; they are negligible. You know, and they're going to be using it in Africa anyway. Aviation, Germany was making synthetic fuels in World War II. They were indeed, and they were using brown coal, of which they had quite a supply to do it, which is a filthy, filthy process. That's exactly what Australia is planning to do to create hydrogen for powering Japanese hydrogen-powered bikes. Aviation pinning their hats on sustainable fuel, potentially I see that, and that means of course that there will be a huge competitor to the ICE car and bike market if aviation wants to get their hands on it. And Sue says, fascinating piece about e-fuels, don't know enough on the topic. Yeah, it's a complex one. I have been reading around and doing quite a bit of research myself into sort of learned papers written by people who do know what they're talking about, because it is so complex. Anyway, that is it for today. As always, thank you very much indeed for looking in. If you have enjoyed the show, I will get the photo up. There we go. Subscribe, like. If you're on YouTube, you know where the buttons are over there. Do become a subscriber. Do help me out. I've been trying to get to 500 subscribers for quite a while now. I put a plea up for people to subscribe yesterday on my Facebook page, where I have nearly 8,000 followers. Not one body actually clicked the subscribe button over on YouTube, which is a bit disappointing. So do go over there. If you've enjoyed it on Facebook, you can like it there too. So very much grateful if you could do that, help other people find the show. If you are out there on your bike today, and Germany still mining brown coal, says Nick. Yes, they are, and so are the Poles. And if you recall Margaret Thatcher, one of the big advantages of closing the UK coal mining industry down, apart from getting around the tricky miner problem, was that she could import cheaper brown coal for our fuels, our power stations. Fortunately, we stopped doing that now. Anyway, that's all another matter altogether and off the topic of motorcycles. But if you are out there on your bike today, do keep an eye on the weather. As I said, it is getting stormy from the west, and through the day, what is starting as a relatively still day here in London will get wild later. So if you are out there and about, stay shiny side up. And once again, thank you for looking in. I'm Kevin Williams. This has been Elevenses, and hopefully an interesting show for you. I've quite enjoyed delivering this one. So see you on Wednesday.